The floor space you have in a small shop is very precious, so today I'm combining my table saw with a router table. I'm using the SawStop contractor model, but these principles should apply to most other saws. Hopefully you can use this information to save space in your shop or to learn how to make a router table with dust collection and bit storage. I started by removing the left wing from my table saw, and I also had to remove the switch. After putting the switch back in place, I can start cutting the strips that make up the support frame. I'm using black melamine for this project, which gives a really slick surface, and it also has a plywood core, which provides more strength than the standard chipboard core. After transferring the location of the bolt holes and the switch, I drill slightly oversized holes that will allow for adjustment later on. I also use my router to make a pocket for the switch to sit into. I then pre-drill and screw the frame together, and I used pocket holes so that I can hide the screws in the front piece. And attaching it to the saw was the opposite of removing the frame, but I did have to use longer bolts to accommodate for the thickness of the plywood. The top piece was a little complex because there were a few very precise cuts to make. I was designing and building this project at the same time, so there were a few cuts that I realized weren't needed. But I fixed all of that in the plans for this project that are linked in the description. I cut a rabbet along all 4 edges so the top can sit into the frame. I then use the router to create pockets for the switch and areas so I can access the bolts with a wrench. Next, I needed to remove the area for the router lift, and I first laid down blue tape to prevent any chip out, which this melamine would do very easily. After some very careful measuring and triple checking all of those numbers, I cut out this area using a circular saw, and got right up to the corners as close as I can. I then finished all of these cuts with a handsaw. This hole provides an area for the inside bottom shoulder of the router lift to register against. Rockler was kind enough to help out with this project, and I'm using their Pro Router lift for this build. With the lift in place, making sure that it sat properly, I traced around the outside to mark where I needed to remove material. I then used my router and edge guide to make sure the cuts were straight while creating this rabbet. And I made this rabbet a little bit deeper than I needed. That way I can use the set screws in the router lift to make it flush with the top. I then added an adapter which allows me to use a smaller router with this lift. Next, I cut the parts for the dust collection and bit storage area. I removed an area on one of the side pieces for the cord to pass through, and then screwed the 2 sides and back piece together. I then screwed this to the back support rail and used pocket screws to attach it to the top piece. I also used pocket screws to attach the bottom of this dust collection area and the bottom of the box. I also added foam weather stripping around the front edges of this box to give a better seal for the dust collection when the front door is in place. Off camera, I made a simple bottom drawer with holes and compartments for bits and tools. I also added a safety switch to the right side of this box. At this point, I realized I forgot the most important part of this dust collection box, and that's to remove an area for the dust port to attach to. But luckily this was a quick fix with the jigsaw. You can definitely use the table saw fence for the router table, but I wanted to make one that will allow me to make rabbets and other cuts with bits that need to sit within the fence. These are the pieces that make up the fence, and in the bottom I cut an area for a dust port. I remembered to do that pretty early this time. The front is made up of 2 layers, and the inside piece has to get a slot so the outside can be adjustable. If that doesn't make sense, just hang tight for a second. I started the slot by drilling a hole at the start and stopping points, and then connecting those 2 holes on the router table. All the parts of the fence get screwed together, starting with the back and bottom piece, and then adding the inside front piece. The outside front piece has one more thing that I want to do to it, and that's adding Ttrack. This will allow me to use feather boards and stop blocks. After putting all the pieces together, I can now clamp this to my table saw fence. This is one of the best space-saving tools that I added to my shop. And if you want to make this, I have plans available for sale, linked here as well as in the description. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.